The gala was the kind of event newspapers loved to write about. Lights sparkled from tall chandeliers, polished marble floors reflected the glow, and a string quartet played softly in the background. Luxury cars lined the entrance, and guests in gowns and tailored suits strolled in with confident smiles. It was a gathering of the powerful politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and most importantly, the billionaire family who owned half the city's landmarks. This night was meant to celebrate their influence, but hidden beneath the glamour was another story waiting to unfold. Among the crowd walked a woman who carried herself with quiet strength. She wasn't wearing the flashiest gown, and she wasn't surrounded by an entourage. Yet there was something about her presence that drew a few curious eyes. This was the black woman entrepreneur who had built her company from nothing. Her journey had been long, filled with nights of sacrifice and days of hard work. From a small office with only 2 employees, she had grown her business into a global powerhouse. Many of the guests knew her name from financial headlines, but not everyone connected the stories of success with the calm, graceful woman moving through the crowd that evening. She had been invited because negotiations were underway for a massive deal, $5 billion that could change industries, create jobs, and reshape the future of technology. On paper, it looked like a merger of equals, her innovation and vision paired with the resources of the billionaire family. But what she didn't know as she arrived that evening was that the deal would become about more than just money. It would test the respect people truly had for her. When she first entered the ballroom, the staff greeted her warmly, offering her a glass of champagne. She smiled, thanked them kindly, and looked around at the dazzling room. She wasn't there to impress anyone with wealth, she already knew her worth. What she hoped for was a chance to connect, to build something meaningful. She spotted groups of people gathered near the grand staircase, laughing loudly, while photographers captured every moment. She moved carefully through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings. At one corner of the room, she saw the hosts, the billionaire family. They stood tall, dressed in their finest, greeting guests like royalty. Their fortune was legendary, and their influence stretched into politics, business, and media. When they saw her approaching, they smiled politely but with a hint of curiosity, almost as if they were trying to guess who she was before she reached them. The introductions began. She spoke with grace, her words measured yet warm. She mentioned her company's goals, her excitement for the partnership, and her hopes for what the deal could mean. But as she spoke, she noticed something unsettling. Instead of listening closely, a few members of the family exchanged glances with subtle smirks. One of them leaned slightly to whisper something into another's ear, and they both chuckled quietly. She ignored it, keeping her composure. The evening continued with speeches, auctions for charity, and flowing wine. Guests mingled, boasting about their latest ventures or showing off their expensive jewelry. For many, it was a night of entertainment. For her, it was supposed to be an opportunity to strengthen trust with future partners. Yet as the hours passed, she sensed something was off. Conversations grew shallow whenever she joined in. Jokes were made, not directly cruel, but laced with condescension. A family member once even mistook her for one of the service staff, asking if she could fetch another glass. She corrected them with a calm smile, but deep down, she felt the sting. Still, she chose silence. She knew that strength was not always in reacting, but in observing. Every look, every word, every laugh was stored in her mind. She wasn't angry. She was simply noting the truth: respect cannot be forced, and sometimes the wealthiest rooms are the poorest in dignity. Later in the evening, as the orchestra played a familiar tune, the family gathered near the stage to welcome everyone again. Cameras flashed as they spoke of tradition, honor, and success. Then, casually, one of them made a joke about people who rise from nowhere and think they belong in circles of old money. The crowd laughed. She stood only a few steps away, hearing every word. Though they didn't say her name, the implication was clear. Some eyes turned toward her, then quickly away. In that moment, the room could have turned cold for anyone else. But she stood taller. Her posture didn't falter, her smile didn't disappear. She simply looked around the glittering ballroom, at the people who thought they held all the power, and realized they had no idea who she really was. To them, she was just another guest. To the world, she was a leader shaping the future. And soon, they would learn that their laughter carried a heavy cost. As the night ended, she thanked the hosts politely and left without a single bitter word. The billionaire family returned to their celebration, unaware that the most important decision of their business lives had just shifted quietly in the mind of the woman they mocked. The stage was set for a choice that would echo far beyond the ballroom, one that would remind them and everyone watching that respect cannot be bought, but it can certainly be lost. The next morning, the city's financial press was already buzzing with talk about the charity gala. Photographers had captured the diamond necklaces, the designer suits, and the grand speeches. Articles praised the billionaire family for their generosity and influence. But none of those papers wrote about the small, sharp moments that had cut like invisible knives. No one wrote about the laughter at another person's expense, or the way respect had been dismissed as if it held no value. Those things rarely made headlines. For the black woman entrepreneur, however, those moments could not be forgotten. She sat quietly in her hotel suite, sipping a cup of tea and looking out at the skyline. The city below seemed full of movement, taxis rushing, people walking to work, lights changing, but her mind was steady. She thought about her journey, about the sacrifices she had made to reach this level. She thought about the community she came from, about how people had once told her that dreams like hers were impossible. Yet here she was, one signature away from one of the largest deals in business history. Still, she wondered, was it worth it? Could she truly build a partnership with people who did not see her as equal? Money was powerful, yes. But so was dignity. Meanwhile, across town, the billionaire family's offices were buzzing with excitement. Their top lawyers and advisors had stayed up late preparing documents. Assistants ran in and out of meeting rooms, carrying folders, answering calls, and making sure everything looked perfect. For them, this $5 billion deal wasn't just about money, it was about reputation. Securing this partnership meant they could expand into new markets and show the world that they were still the kings and queens of global business. Yet, as they celebrated among themselves, they still carried the same attitude they had shown at the gala. Some of them laughed about the woman's serious face at the party. Others dismissed her as too soft or lucky to even be in the room. What they didn't know was that every one of those words would soon return to them like a mirror, showing who they truly were. Later that day, the woman received a call from one of her closest advisors. He was an older man who had supported her since her earliest days. He had seen her struggle when banks rejected her for loans, when clients doubted her, and when competitors tried to push her out of the market. "They don't see you yet," he said gently over the phone. "They only see what they want to see. But remember, you don't need them. They need you." His words stayed in her heart. She remembered the faces of her employees, hundreds of people who now worked at her company, people who trusted her to make choices not just for profit, but for fairness and future growth. She thought about the young women who looked up to her, believing that they too could rise despite obstacles. And she thought about her parents, who had taught her that respect was worth more than gold. The decision she was about to make would not just be about her. It would be about all of them. The following evening, she attended a private dinner with a few close business allies. These were people who truly respected her and valued her voice. Over glasses of water and plates of roasted vegetables, she spoke openly about what had happened at the gala. She didn't describe the jokes with anger. Instead, she spoke with calm clarity, as if she were simply pointing to the truth. Her allies listened carefully, nodding, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "You deserve better," one of them said. They don't understand who they're dealing with, another added. You don't need to lower yourself for them, a third said firmly. Her allies reminded her of something important. She wasn't standing in this deal because she begged for a seat at their table. She was here because her company had achieved something no one else had. Her technology, her vision, her leadership, those were the reasons they had come running to her. Without her, the deal could not exist. She smiled softly at their words, grateful for the reminder. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. Meanwhile, the family was already celebrating as if the deal had been signed. They spoke confidently to reporters, hinting at a groundbreaking partnership that would soon be announced. They held meetings with bankers, discussing how the new $5 billion expansion would benefit their empire. They believed the future was already theirs. But as they toasted their imaginary success, she sat quietly with her thoughts, her heart leaning toward a different choice. The morning of the signing arrived. The family's headquarters was glowing with energy. The main boardroom was decorated with flowers, polished tables, and rows of bottled water. Journalists waited outside for the announcement. The billionaire family wore confident smiles, expecting the day to end with headlines praising their empire once again. The woman, however, entered the building with a calm that surprised even her own team. She wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, but her presence filled the room. Her steps were slow and steady. Her eyes were kind, yet firm. As she walked past the cameras, some reporters whispered her name, recognizing the powerful figure who had shaken industries before. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was heavy with expectation. Lawyers spread documents across the long table. Pens were placed neatly, ready for signatures. The billionaire family greeted her with polished smiles, their voices filled with forced charm. But underneath, she could sense the same lack of respect that had been present at the gala. It lingered in the way they looked at her, in the way they tried to dominate the conversation. She said little at first, simply listening. She let them talk about profits, markets, and strategy. She let them boast about how much the world would praise them once the deal was announced. All the while, she remained silent, her expression unreadable. Finally, when it was her turn to speak, the room grew quiet. She looked at each person in the family, her gaze steady. And though her words were soft, they carried a weight heavier than money. You invited me to your gala, she said slowly. And in that room, I heard not partnership, but mockery. I saw not respect, but arrogance. I was not treated as an equal. And if I cannot be respected as a person, I cannot sign this deal as a partner. Her words stunned the room. For the first time, the family's smiles disappeared. Their advisors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A silence fell so deep that the sound of the city outside seemed to echo through the windows. She placed the pen on the table without signing and stood up. This deal is cancelled, she said firmly. Respect is not something money can buy. And without respect, there is no business. Then, with the same calm grace she had carried all along, she walked out of the room, leaving billions of dollars behind but carrying something far more valuable, her dignity. The family sat frozen, realizing too late that their arrogance had cost them everything. The story of that boardroom moment spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, whispers began to move across the city. Journalists waiting outside the family's headquarters had expected a press conference, cameras ready to capture smiling faces and signed contracts. Instead, they watched as the black woman walked out with calm grace, followed by her team, leaving the billionaire family behind closed doors with expressions of shock and disbelief. The reporters knew something unusual had happened. They pressed their microphones to the family's spokesperson, who stammered and tried to give vague answers, but it was clear the grand announcement would not be coming. By the afternoon, phones rang non-stop across financial circles. Advisors, bankers, and investors wanted to know the truth. How could a $5 billion deal collapse in a matter of minutes? Rumors began to circulate. Some said there had been disagreements over the fine print. Others whispered that personalities had clashed. But for those who had attended the gala 2 nights earlier, the answer seemed clear. They had seen the subtle mockery, the whispers, the disrespect. They suspected that the woman had simply refused to let herself or her work be treated that way. Back in her office, she sat with her closest team. The atmosphere was quiet, but not sad. In fact, there was a feeling of relief and strength. Some of her younger employees looked nervous at first. $5 billion was not just a number, it was opportunity, expansion, growth, and security. They feared that walking away might slow their progress. But when she spoke, their doubts faded. She reminded them of their company's values. "We built this business on respect," she said softly. "Respect for our people, respect for our clients, and respect for ourselves. If we trade that away for money, then we lose the very foundation that made us strong." Her words touched them deeply. They realized that true leadership was not about chasing every deal, but about choosing the right ones. Meanwhile, the billionaire family gathered in private. Their voices were no longer confident and smooth. They were angry, confused, and restless. For them, business had always been about power, buying influence, buying people, buying everything they wanted. They could not understand why someone would walk away from such an amount. They argued among themselves, blaming each other. Some said they should have been more respectful at the gala. Others dismissed the woman as overly sensitive. But one truth haunted them all: without her, the deal was gone. The turning point came later that week when a well-known journalist published an article that revealed everything. An anonymous guest at the gala had shared what had happened: the mocking tone, the dismissive comments, and the final cancellation of the deal. The article didn't use cruel words, but it painted a clear picture of arrogance meeting dignity. Readers across the world quickly took notice. Social media carried the story into homes and offices everywhere. The black woman entrepreneur was praised for her courage, her calmness, and her refusal to trade self-respect for wealth. Soon, invitations began to pour in. Other business leaders, ones who had long admired her but never had the chance to work with her, reached out. They offered new opportunities, partnerships, and investments. Unlike the billionaire family, these leaders valued what she stood for. They saw her as more than a name on a contract. They saw her as a symbol of fairness and strength. For her, the most surprising part wasn't the attention. She had been in the spotlight before, but this moment felt different. This time, people weren't just talking about her company's success, they were talking about her principles. Messages came from young women in universities, from small entrepreneurs struggling to be taken seriously, and even from community leaders who said her decision gave them courage. She read those letters and emails with quiet gratitude. They reminded her why she had chosen the harder path. While she moved forward, the billionaire family faced a different reality. Investors began to question their judgment. Business partners pulled away, not wanting their own reputations tied to arrogance and disrespect. Stock prices of their public companies dipped slightly, not because of numbers on paper, but because of perception. In business, image mattered as much as profit, and their image was now stained. Behind closed doors, the family tried to repair the damage. They hired public relations teams, issued carefully written statements, and tried to present themselves as misunderstood. But the public was not convinced. People remembered the photos from the gala, the laughter, the dismissive glances. They remembered the woman's quiet strength as she walked away. That image was stronger than any press release. One evening, the woman was invited to speak at a leadership conference. The hall was full of young entrepreneurs, executives, and students eager to hear her story. When she stepped onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet in applause. She didn't speak of the billionaire family directly, nor did she focus on the cancelled deal. Instead, she spoke about choices. In life and in business, she said gently, you will face moments when the world asks you to trade your values for success. You will be told that money is everything, that status is everything. But if you lose respect for yourself, no amount of money will ever make you truly rich. Her words echoed through the hall. Many wiped away tears, others nodded firmly, as if she had spoken the very thoughts they had been too afraid to say aloud. The turning point was clear now. What seemed like a loss of billions had become something far greater, a victory of dignity over arrogance, of values over vanity. The world had seen that moment in the boardroom not as weakness, but as strength. She had taught a lesson not only to the billionaire family but to anyone who thought power was only about wealth. Back at her headquarters, she focused again on her company's growth. She didn't spend her days thinking about the family or the deal she had refused. She poured her energy into building new products, creating jobs, and mentoring young leaders. Her company flourished, attracting partnerships that were not just profitable, but respectful. Every new contract was signed with people who valued her voice, her vision, and her integrity. The billionaire family, however, continued to struggle with the shadow of what they had lost. Every time they tried to negotiate a new deal, the memory of that cancelled agreement returned. People remembered their arrogance, and many chose to walk away before signing. The family realized that money could open many doors, but arrogance could close them just as quickly. And so, the hidden power was revealed, not the power of wealth, but the power of knowing one's worth. The woman had not needed to raise her voice, argue, or fight. She had simply chosen to walk away, and that choice had changed everything. The world had now begun to watch every move she made. After news of the cancelled deal spread, business reporters from New York to London to Dubai wanted her story. TV shows asked her for interviews, magazines put her on the cover, and universities invited her to speak to their students. She did not rush into the spotlight, though. She chose her appearances carefully, always reminding herself that this was not about fame but about teaching a lesson through action. The billionaire family, on the other hand, faced growing questions from all sides. Investors wanted explanations. Bankers asked for updates. Business allies grew nervous about attaching themselves to people who had lost such a major opportunity. Their lawyers held emergency meetings, their public relations team worked around the clock, and yet nothing seemed to erase the truth. The woman had walked away, and the deal was gone. Soon, the tension reached a breaking point. A global business summit was scheduled in the city, where top CEOs, innovators, and leaders would gather. Both the woman and the billionaire family were invited to speak. For the family, this was a chance to repair their image. For the woman, it was an opportunity to speak directly, not just to the boardroom or to her employees, but to the entire business world. The summit hall was magnificent, with glass walls that looked out over the skyline. Hundreds of people filled the seats, and cameras from major news networks were positioned in every corner. The billionaire family took the stage first. They spoke confidently about new strategies and future opportunities, but their words lacked the usual spark. The audience clapped politely, but the energy was low. Everyone was waiting for her. When her name was announced, the room shifted. People leaned forward, curious. As she walked to the stage, the applause grew louder, stronger, until it filled the entire hall. She stood at the podium, calm and composed, her voice steady as she began. She didn't start with numbers or profits. Instead, she told a story. She described walking into a ballroom where people judged her not by her achievements but by her appearance. She described sitting in a boardroom where her value was measured in dollars, not dignity. She never used names, never pointed fingers, but the message was clear. The audience knew exactly what she was talking about. Then she paused, letting the silence settle, before she spoke words that would soon be quoted across the world. Respect is the foundation of every partnership. Without it, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no future. I did not walk away from $5 billion. I walked towards something more valuable: self-respect, equality, and the kind of business that builds, not breaks. The hall erupted in applause. Some stood, clapping with emotion. Cameras flashed as journalists scribbled down her words. It was not a speech of anger but of clarity. It was the kind of truth people rarely heard in such grand settings. As she stepped down from the stage, dozens of leaders rushed to meet her. Some shook her hand, others congratulated her, and many offered new partnerships right there in the hall. They admired her strength. They wanted to work with someone who valued integrity over pride. In that moment, she realized she had gained more than she had lost. Meanwhile, the billionaire family sat silently in the front row. Their faces revealed what their hearts tried to hide: shock, regret, and a deep awareness that the world now saw them differently. They had entered the summit hoping to restore their reputation, but instead, the woman's words had cast a brighter light on their failure. They could not escape the truth. In the days that followed, news networks replayed her speech again and again. Social media carried clips of her calm yet powerful words. People everywhere shared the story, calling her a role model. Parents told their children about her. Teachers used her example in classrooms. Young entrepreneurs hung her quotes on their office walls. For her, the most touching messages came from everyday people. A young woman wrote to her, saying she had been afraid to speak up at her job but now felt stronger. A small business owner sent her a letter, thanking her for showing that success is not only about numbers. Even community leaders from places she had never visited wrote to her, calling her an inspiration. At her company, the atmosphere changed too. Employees walked taller, prouder, knowing they worked for someone who valued them as more than workers. Clients trusted her more deeply, knowing that if she could walk away from billions to stand by her principles, she would also stand by them. The billionaire family tried desperately to recover. They held press conferences, issued apologies, and tried to shift attention to other projects. But no matter what they did, people remembered. They remembered the laughter at the gala, the arrogance at the boardroom, and the calm strength of the woman who walked away. Their businesses continued, yes, but the glow of untouchable power they once carried was gone. The climax of this story was not a loud fight or a dramatic argument. It was a simple choice made by a woman who valued dignity over wealth. That choice echoed louder than any deal, louder than any press release. It reminded the world that power does not only belong to those with the most money, it also belongs to those who know when to say no. And in that moment at the summit, in front of the world, she proved that the greatest victory comes not from winning a contract but from standing tall in the face of arrogance and showing that true strength is quiet, firm, and unforgettable. After the business summit, her life entered a new chapter. What had begun as a humiliating evening at a gala had now transformed into a global story of dignity and courage. Every major financial magazine and newspaper carried headlines about her decision. Some called it the $5 billion lesson. Others named her the woman who said no. But for her, it was not about the labels, it was about the principle that had guided her. At her company, the atmosphere was alive with energy. Employees walked with brighter smiles, knowing their leader had shown the world that values came before money. In the cafeteria, conversations buzzed about how their company was now seen as a symbol of integrity. Even the interns, who had once worried about whether they would have jobs after such a huge deal collapsed, felt a sense of pride. They realized that they were working in a place where respect was not just a word in a mission statement, but a living truth. New opportunities began to flow in. Partnerships were offered by global companies that admired her stand. Venture capitalists, who usually invested only in numbers, now wanted to invest in her vision. Government leaders called, asking if she would join national projects to help inspire young entrepreneurs. Every door that closed because of the billionaire family seemed to open 10 more. But she stayed humble. When asked by reporters if she felt like she had won, she simply said, "This is not about winning or losing. It's about reminding ourselves what matters. Business is not just profit. It's people. It's trust. Without that, money means nothing." Meanwhile, the billionaire family's empire continued to struggle. Their once flawless reputation had been shaken. Investors withdrew quietly, partners avoided them, and media stories often mentioned the cancelled deal whenever their name appeared. No matter how many new projects they announced, people always remembered the night they mocked a woman who turned out to hold the real power. For her, the aftermath was not about revenge. She never used her platform to attack them directly. Instead, she focused on building. She launched scholarship programs for underprivileged students. She expanded her company into communities that had been ignored by big business. She mentored young leaders, reminding them that success without respect was hollow. One of her proudest moments came months later when she visited a small school. The children there had made posters with her face on them, calling her our role model. When she walked into the classroom, a little girl raised her hand shyly and asked, "Ma'am, how did you stay strong when they laughed at you?" The woman knelt beside her and said softly, "Strength is not about shouting back. It's about knowing who you are and never letting anyone take that away." The little girl smiled, and the entire class clapped, even though no one had asked them to. Her words traveled far, touching lives in ways she had never expected. People who had never followed business news before now knew her story. Taxi drivers spoke of her to passengers. Market vendors told her story to their children. Even in distant countries, her name was mentioned with admiration. She often reflected quietly on how things had turned out. Walking away from $5 billion had seemed like a risk, but it became the choice that defined her legacy. She understood now that money could vanish, deals could collapse, but values built something far more lasting. The billionaire family eventually faded from the front pages. Their arrogance had cost them not just a deal but also their reputation. Their empire survived, but it was never the same. They had become a warning in business schools, a case study of how disrespect can destroy opportunity. She, on the other hand, became more than a business leader. She became a symbol. People saw her not just as an entrepreneur but as a voice for fairness, respect, and dignity. She received awards, honorary degrees, and recognition from world leaders. But through it all, she stayed grounded, always reminding others that her greatest achievement was not the wealth she built but the respect she refused to lose. As years passed, her story was retold again and again. Books were written about her life. Young professionals studied her decisions in leadership programs. Her company continued to grow, but what endured even more was the lesson she had given to the world, that true power is not measured by money, but by the courage to walk away when respect is absent. And so, the story that began with mockery at a party ended with a legacy that inspired millions. She had shown that even in a world obsessed with wealth and status, dignity stood taller than gold. Her quiet strength echoed louder than their laughter, and it became a reminder for generations to come that self-respect is priceless and once protected, it can never be taken away.